You awaken in the late hours of the night, startled by vicious snarling sounds, partnered with the occasional thump of something slamming against a hardened surface. Concerned that one of the many creatures contained within the seemingly infinite rooms had escaped its enclosure, you slip out from your room and follow the sounds. Hopefully, it wasn't the spites again. Those curious forest spirits from Athaloran were more mischievous than anything, but they were still quite capable of unleashing no small amount of pain when in a sinister mood. Not to mention, the fey critters were quite adept at avoiding capture due to their magical nature and shape-shifting abilities. Still, it would be better to find them on your terms rather than the other way around. As you close in on the disturbance, the now familiar and comforting mysterious warmth radiates through your chest. This gives you pause, as it only does so when you utilize the winds of magic, though in this instance, like when you battled the unholy blade, it is an unconscious effort. Almost like your power has a will of its own. Shaking off the concerning thought, it dawns on you that your senses have been sharpened by the subtle sorcery weaving around you. The source of the noise is in truth far quieter than you first realized, and the hint of spilt blood is on the air. Trepidation builds in your gut as you continue to approach the clearly enraged entity, realizing that your path is leading towards the Hall of Convergence. Perhaps something had managed to sneak into the house. Or maybe something in the library. Just as you are about to round the last corner, you halt for a moment, hearing the distinct sound of someone whispering between grunts of frustration. A chill creeps down your spine, and out of an overabundance of caution, you carefully wrap yourself in tendrils of ulgu that constantly pervade the house, masking your presence from virtually all forms of detection. Prioritizing stealth, you slip around the final wall and scan the Hall of Convergence, your enhanced vision picking out a hunched figure leaning against the Drakewald oak gateway to the library. It's the Loremaster. You almost call out to him, before you hear him softly growl in anger, hands coated in blood pressed against the gargantuan doors. As you watch, the source of the ominous knocking sounds become clear, your teacher slamming his body against the portal and tearing at the glowing runes. Hisses of pain and hatred escape from the man as his desperation grows, resorting to an animalistic frenzy by scratching and biting at the unyielding wood. Crimson sprays in all directions from the Loremaster's frantic display, his fingers torn to ruin, and scattered teeth upon the floor, showing he has been at this for some time. You step backwards in shock at the gore-strewn scene, freezing in terror as the man before you snaps around, like he somehow heard you, despite your caution in the shadowy wards. With blood pouring from his snarling visage, and staining a substantial amount of his body, the Loremaster appears more demon than human, as he carefully scans the room, his eyes passing directly over you without pause. Afraid to move lest you reveal your presence, you simply watch as your teacher turns his attention back to the door before him. His eyes. They've changed. One of them is an almost lifeless, dull red, while the other, it looks exactly like one of your eyes. He slams one of his shredded hands against the oak one last time, striking the door with such force that the sound of bones shattering echoes around the chamber. He stares at the mangled mess that was once his hand, snapped bones protruding from his flesh, before letting out an irritated sigh and walking away from the door. Seemingly unconcerned by his ruined body, the Loremaster regains his usual composure with each step he takes, until at last he vanishes in a puff of shadow while crossing the threshold to another hall. Your mind reels as it tries to make sense of the horrid scene that just played out. Stumbling towards the library's immense gateway, you watch in fascination as the oaken doors rapidly regenerate from the various gouges and scratches left by the Loremaster. Within seconds, it is back to pristine form, even the scattered nails and bloody teeth melting away into fragments of shadow. Just how long has this been going on? Does your teacher come here every night to assault the library doors? And why? You place your hand against the smooth wood while pondering, confusion growing as various sigils pulse in response to your touch. Last time, it had only been a single rune, but this time, nearly half of all of them were radiant with energy. One mystery at a time. Stealing your courage, you briskly jog to the nearest threshold and step through, shadows enveloping you before depositing just outside the Loremaster's room. Taking a deep breath to steady yourself for the carnage you may be walking in on, you knock once before entering the chamber. Standing in the crackling firelight, you reflexively flinch at the expectation of broken flesh and blood strewn about. But instead, you find your teacher peacefully sitting at his desk and reading one of his tomes. The man turns to look at you with the same pleased smile he always bears, twisting on the right side of his mouth into the hint of a sadistic sneer. There is no blood, no mauled hands. His eyes are their normal shade. The entire room looks exactly like you would normally expect it to, and the winds are utterly calm. No illusions or magic are at play. Just what is going on? Good evening, young lore seeker. I had begun to fear that your lessons were taking too great a toll on you, as you haven't been by for a number of nights. As ever, your timing is excellent. I was just about to brew some tea, using my favorite Lustrian mix. Do sit and make yourself comfortable for a moment while I prepare some. Oh, are you all right? You look quite unwell, my dear student. Feeling a little under the weather lately? Well then, the fates must have wished for you to heal this malady. I can assure you, this Lustrian tea is quite potent at restoring the body and soul. So which creature brought you to my door this night? Ah, you wish to know about one of the nightmares of Lustria, do you? How fortuitous, picking the deadly jungles of the New World on the same eve we enjoy one of its many pleasures. Listen well, my dear student, as I tell you of the beast that even the children of the Old Ones fear. The Pale Death. Many years ago, I embarked upon what I still consider having been the greatest journey of my life, sailing to the New World. Quite the comical name for that continent, all things considered, but in any event, after quite the dangerous voyage due to ambitious Arabian pirates, a close encounter with one of those colossal sharks known as megalodons, and no less than 3 horrible storms, I finally arrived upon the shores of Lustria. Back then, I did not have the clout within the Empire that I do now, so I earned my way on board under the guise of a priest of Manan. Obviously, this is not technically true, but I am well versed in the teachings of many gods, and ensured that I followed his strictures to the letter, in hopes of avoiding the sea god's wrath. though that may explain the particularly troubled voyage. But I made extreme efforts to ensure that none of the crew died, save that one unfortunate incident involving the cabin boy. But that was not my fault, and I'll descend through the 9 circles of Slaaneish's domain rather than say otherwise. Even I cannot save someone who attempts cheating Norscan mercenaries at games of chance multiple times despite my warnings. Onto the core of the tale. We made landfall on the northern shore of Lustria, just a little way east of Amazon Island. The goal of the expedition was simple: to enter the steaming jungles in search of treasure and lost knowledge, before fleeing back to civilization with all that could be carried. We journeyed south into the uncharted lands of the ancients at a slow pace, having to cut through absurd amounts of foliage for just about every step. Still, progress is progress, and within a few days we had managed to push far enough inland that the salty smell of the sea had faded away. So far we had been relatively lucky, only losing a handful of our company to various carnivorous plants and murderous insects, before coming across a fascinating find. Before us stood a tall pillar carved from gold. Various bizarre and alien faces stacked atop one another, with jewels for eyes. Obviously, my companions were quite excited, as they only cared for treasure hunting. But I had come to learn of the lizard men and their many secrets. Using what precious little I managed to scavenge from scraps of loot brought to the old world by prior adventurers, I attempted to decipher the writings upon the totem pole. I had only just translated 2 words, that being warning and death, before I noticed a peculiar sound. A short distance behind the golden treasure lay a deep pool of water that seemed connected to some underground cave network, as the back half led into a grotto. Just under the excited shouts of men, I could detect an ominous hissing sound. Turning towards the tranquil pool to locate the source of the noise, I only managed to detect a growing shadow before something massive exploded out from the water. Panicked yells came from behind my now thoroughly soaked back, and I spun around to see one of the Norskins scream just before large claws decapitated him. In the center of our company loomed a primordial terror of Lustria. Clammy, pale scales covering the entire hide of this monster, except for the large fin protruding from its back, along with a smaller one from its head. My eyes were drawn to the muscular tail lashing behind the beast, as most curiously, the appendage split near the end, to form a distinct twin tail, almost like the forked tongue that snaked out from the creature's mouth. The deep hissing sound rumbled out once more, as that long pink tongue continued to flitter out, the monster leaning its head in an almost quizzical manner. That is when one of the men near me harshly whispered that the creature had no eyes, which upon further inspection, I realized it indeed was blind. Instead, it had an elaborate set of quill-like whiskers in various places across its head that twitched with sensation. That fool should have never opened his mouth, as moments after he spoke, the scaled horror spun about and leapt upon him with impressive precision. Massive jaws snapped shut around his arm as the poor soul tried to flee. Those standing too close to him trampled into the mud or sliced down by sword-length talons. I watched in gruesome fascination as my former crewmate shrieked in agony. Trickles of venom spilling from around the beast's fangs as it pumped its prey full. It seemed the monster had hollow teeth that naturally produced toxins which were quite acidic, causing an unpleasant sizzling sound, as even a mere drop of the stuff caused horrific scarring. That particular victim suffered quite the painful but quick death as the venom surged through his body, chemically burning him from the inside out, boiling his organs as his veins bulged from swelling. At that moment, I finally managed to deduce the identity of this ancient nightmare, noted in only the rarest of texts as the Troglodon. To witness the brutality of such a creature in the flesh was an honor, one that I'll take to my grave. The Titan of the Forgotten Ages savaging my allies, who proved either too frightened or dull-witted to remain still. After only a few short seconds, the adventuring band had been massacred from over 30 men to just 8. Perhaps we could have stood a reasonable chance of self-defense, if presenting an organized defense prepared for our hunter. But the aquatic beast's ambush had ensured that idea never came to pass. As the Troglodon feasted upon the flesh of those slain so far, I contemplated my narrowing list of options on how to escape this predicament. While I would embrace my end merrily, having been blessed to discover such a rare specimen, I did intend to at least give survival a reasonable shot. The captain of our disastrous expedition managed to quietly palm one of the totem pole's eye gems, hurling the object into the jungle beyond with an impressive toss. The sound alerted the Troglodon, the monster standing to its full height towards where the distraction had landed. It began to sway sinuously, flicking out its long tongue in attempts to detect further prey. As the primordial creature stomped its way towards our find, the captain motioned for those of us alive to gather and flee. As we each rallied together, I noticed the Troglodon halt, and motioned for my companions to freeze. Despite the distance of easily 50 yards, the covering sound of the jungle's natural fauna, and the extreme care with which we had moved, the cursed thing still seemed to have noticed something. Holding my breath and fearing that my dripping sweat from that miserable humidity and heat would somehow be enough to alert our hunter, I watched the Troglodon continue its serpentine dance, before seeming to glance back in the direction of our thrown gem. Suddenly, it made a truly bizarre noise while looking over that way, spitting out a gout of liquid and waiting for some type of response. Nothing happened. Realizing what the pale death was up to, I could only chuckle in defeat. Clever girl. It turned back towards where it had heard our movements, and spit again, launching a frighteningly accurate gout of toxic bile at us. I barely had time to react, despite knowing what was coming, hurling myself to the side just in time, as the venom impacted the remaining crew. Shrieks of agony filled the air, as the viscous material coated their bodies and started to burn them. Reacting to the screams, the Troglodon roared an eerie cry and charged into them with gaping jaws. I couldn't help but marvel that the venom the creature spit is so potent that it managed to kill 2 men covered most by it before the creature could even close the distance, their flesh eaten away entirely in mere seconds. The rest were butchered entirely, though to the captain's credit, he never moved or screamed out in pain. However, despite his incredible willpower, he could not prevent the sizzling sound from where some of the Troglodon's spit had contacted his skin, which the beast seems primarily to rely on for triangulating prey. As the sole survivor of the expedition party, I simply waited for the ancient subterranean hunter to notice me. Sooner or later, it would either detect some subtle movement using its whiskers, or perhaps taste my scent upon the air with that forked tongue. Either way, I had no escape, until fate smiled upon me. For as you are aware, I am still quite alive, and the reason is due to intervention from the lizard men. From the blood-drenched plants surrounding the Troglodon's lair, a single skink emerged and approached us. This surprised me, as according to those texts I had read, even the denizens of Lustria feared the Pale Death, for it was utterly untamable, and would kill any who approached. Yet I bore witness as this single skink, bearing a forked tail identical to the monster, managed to instantly tame the beast, but with a simple gesture. Stunned by my sudden salvation, it took me more time than I care to admit before I realized the lizard man was watching me. It turned out he knew I would be there, for it had been foretold in an age before the coming of men. I was to follow him, and so I did, starting my true journey into the depths of Lustria, where I studied along the lizardmen for 10 short years. One day, that is a trial you will need to take as well. For how can one expect to be a true Loremaster without attaining knowledge from the ancient ones? I do hope, for your sake, that your introduction to Lustria is at least a tad less eventful than mine was. I will admit it took many months before the image of that poor chap who was just about to burst due to the Troglodon venom injection left my dreams. Still, to be a lore seeker is to search the world for all forms of knowledge, including the various horrid ways in which people can be slain. You will get used to it eventually. That much I can assure you from experience. Death, after all, is merely another teacher who blesses us with such wondrous knowledge. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this episode of the Monstrous Arcanum, featuring the Lustrian horror, the Troglodon. I hope you all enjoy it, and if you did, please hit that like button and leave a comment so YouTube will spread this video around to others. This series has been an absolute ball, and I'm glad to be working hard again, but a lot of people seem to be struggling to find out about it. So sharing it around and of course engaging with it and each episode helps so very much. Real quick, I would like to thank my patrons for their continued support. It means so much to me, and I deeply, truly appreciate it. I actually originally was not going to do any monsters from Lustria, but the patrons really wanted a Lustria monster, so here we go. Finally, I want to personally acknowledge the big boys for their generous backing, being of course Eric, Charles Bode, Jeffrey Ramers, Sign of the Emperor, Wendell Short Eyes, CJ Ubusta, and Higgins the Seagull. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!